Hello, in this video I'm going to show you how we made our cheap sailing rig for our tender. Now before we start, there's a couple of things I want to say. First of all, the quality of this video isn't great because this is a last minute thing. I've just realised we're selling this boat and our tender is going with it. So this is a very last chance I've got to show you how I made our sailing rig. And I don't have any of our proper camera equipment with us, so I'll show you what I'm doing to record this. There's an inspection mirror. There you go. You are a phone and you are being held by a disposable plastic cup and a napkin. So I've made a phone holder out of those and I'm just making do with what I've got, so bear with me with the quality. The second thing is, I might look a little bit sad in this video. That's because I am. I've just signed away this boat and our tender. And I'm just kind of coming to terms with that. It's a very it's exciting because we've got a new boat, so I'm not complaining. But you know, when you form a bond with your boat, it's really difficult to let them go. I kind of feel like I'm selling a family member. So if I look a bit depressed, that's why. Right then, let's get started. So why did I build a sailing rig in the first place? Basically, the plans that I used to build our tender, the sailing version uses an Optimist rig. And I looked into buying one of those and they're really expensive. I mean, for what they are, they were far too expensive for my taste. So that was the first reason, to save some money. And the second reason was, if I had used an Optimist rig, then the boom would have been very low down. And every time we tacked the tender, we'd have been having to crouch right down, and that didn't seem very convenient to me. So I decided to make the mast taller so that the boom could be higher up and that would give us a bit more head clearance. So that's why I did it. First of all, there was the planning stage, and I couldn't find the dimensions of an Optimist rig online very easily. So what I ended up doing is something that I've done lots of times for different reasons. I got some diagrams of Optimist, which are easy to find, and then from the LOA, which I knew, I was able to scale up the different parts of the boat, and using a ruler on the monitor, I was able to then make the rest of the measurements of the rig. I then thought about where I wanted the boom to be, and that's a balance because the higher you have your boom, the taller the rig, the less stable the boat is, and the more stress you're putting on the components, the mast step and other parts of the rig. So it's a bit of a compromise between seaworthiness and the convenience of having a boom that's a little bit higher and gives you a little bit more head clearance. Once I knew the dimensions involved, I went online onto eBay and bought some very cheap but good quality aluminium tubing, or aluminum for our American cousins, and I bought 6082 aluminium, which is very good at resisting corrosion in a marine environment. So I'll explain to you now how I went about making the rig. Here's the mast, or here's one section of the mast, and I made it from aluminium tubing 3mm thick, so it's nice and strong. And the nice thing about aluminium is it's very nice to work with. It's easy to cut, it's easy to drill, it taps quite nicely too, so you can drill a hole smaller than the diameter of a screw, for example, and then when you screw in the screw, it threads itself into the base material, and that's quite strong. So there's a couple of things I want to show you with this. First of all, I had a problem buying tubes longer than 2 meters long. And our mast is taller than that, it's just under 3 meters long. So I had to come up with a way of making a mast splice. That was really easy in the end. If I show you the other end of it, you can see what I did. This tube was much longer and I cut it, I would say that kind of distance from the end. And then once I'd cut that section off, this was using an angle grinder, I then cut the small section of tube that I just removed into 2 halves. After I'd done that, I was able to insert the 2 halves into the original tube, and then with a little bit of tweaking I had to cut some more away to give me some more clearance. I then drilled through the 2 sections and riveted them in place. So you can see they're riveted there. And afterwards what I actually did was I taped an electric drill to the end of this tube. I then put that on the floor, used my foot to operate the drill. I was wearing a glove, so this whole thing span around. It's kind of like having a lathe. And then I was able to fine tune the diameter of this with sandpaper, and it was a very tight interference fit to begin with. and then by rotating this and using the sandpaper on it, I was able to tweak the dimensions and get it to the perfect size. Here we go. Pushes in, it's a tight fit, and then once that's in there, I drilled a hole through the two, just there, and basically I then got some threaded bar. This is stainless steel threaded bar. I heated it up until it was red hot, and then I bent it round into that shape. I added a nylock nut and a penny washer, and then this just goes into the hole there. It's quite tight to get it in, which is good because once it's in, it doesn't want to come out again. And there we are, that's how it sits when it's fitted. And onto this, you can then fit a block which can be used to hoist up the Sprit. So I'll show this all in position together now. There you go, that's it in position. It sits in there on its own, there's no other means of locking it, it just stays in there. Even if you pull down extremely hard on this, that's not going anywhere. You can then use this carabiner to insert into the end of the Sprit, which I'll show you shortly, and then this line hoists the Sprit up and down. I then made some homemade jammers or stoppers or whatever you would like to call them, and I'll show you how I did that now. Before I show you the stoppers, I'll just give you another close-up there of that threaded bar and block the whole arrangement that I've got there. There you are, that's how it works. It can pivot around like that, it can move up and down, and it doesn't come out. Once it's in, it just stays there. So very simple, but very effective. And the Mast splice itself works really well. There is no play whatsoever in there. There's no wobbling at all. It's actually quite difficult to remove it sometimes, so you can lubricate it before you put it in there to give yourself an easier time of getting it out. I'm really happy with how that turned out. Onto the homemade stoppers then. There it is. It is a piece of copper pipe which I cut off using a pipe cutter, and then you can make a large diameter hole here through which you can eventually insert a screwdriver. Then further down the other side of the copper pipe, you make a small diameter hole which can take a screw, and then the same here, you can make a small hole in the bottom through which you can get a screw, and then here with an angle grinder again, you can cut a V into it, and this is a very, very simple, cheap but effective stopper. As I said before, to fit this to the mast, you just need to drill a hole that's a smaller diameter than the screw threads, and then as you insert the screw, you have to be careful about this, but if you apply pressure and screw the screw in, it taps itself into the mast and it's very strong. So that's how I fitted it, and I'll show you how this works now with a little line. Here is the line which hauls up the bottom of the Sprit with the carabiner, and you can see that just runs through the stopper there. And if you want to block it off, it's very simple. There you are, that's already blocked, and the harder you pull on that, the harder it blocks itself off. So that's already very, very secure, it's not going anywhere. But if you want to be really, really sure, and maybe there's a load that's coming and going on this that's not constant, and you want to make sure it holds, then all you need to do is tuck that behind there, and that's very, very secure. I've used this, you know, a lot of times, and I've never had one of these slip once. So it's a really good, cheap way of making yourself a stopper. You can make these in all different sizes, of course. This is a small 10mm copper pipe. You could use larger pipe and therefore have larger lines running through it afterwards. So looking at the base of the mast there, as we come up, we've got one stopper, copper stopper, I think I'll nickname those. We have one copper stopper here, and that is for the vang. And then it's very simple. There's the other stopper there, and that is to hoist the Sprit. Then we've got the mast splice, and at the top of the mast I made it a nice sail friendly profile by adding a little section of cutting board inside, and then again I used my drill lathe method to sand it down into a nice rounded profile. Initially that was not finished, it was glued in place, and I stuck a rivet in there as well just for good measure. And with the normal Optimist sail that I bought, which is a school sail which just slides over the mast, that was that finished. However, I then made a storm sail out of a polytarp, and I added these two eye bolts at the top so that you can run a halyard through these with which to hoist the storm sail. Rather than buy these separately, I actually found the cheapest way to buy these was to buy a small turnbuckle, stainless steel turnbuckle, and you get 2 eye bolts with that, and that's cheaper than buying the eye bolts separately. That was the mast. Now this is the boom. First of all, I made a gooseneck. You can see how I did that, very simple. I just used some flat aluminium profile, and there you are, 2 sections on the outside riveted into position. And then there's another semicircular profile section, again made out of flat bar, which I bent, and that's riveted into place on the end there. So there's a little bit of play in this. It can move up and down, and you know, there's some play in here. They can bend a little bit to take some of the strain out of the system. And I just put some heat shrink on there just to give it a little bit of protection against chafe against the mast. So really simple, easy to make, but effective. We've then got a copper stopper. This is for the other end of the vang, and then we've then got the attachment points for the main sheet. Again, all these fittings are held into place by screws tapped into the aluminium, so really easy to do, but it works. And then we've got the fitting for the outhaul. And then we've got a nice large diameter protective cap here on the end of the boom, because if you tie your tender alongside your boat, then the boom can get blown into it, and this stops it from scratching your hull. And that is the boom. We've then got the sprit, and as I said before, this is hoisted. You just insert the carabiner there like that, and then when this is under tension, that's enough to haul that up and keep it in place. That's almost all there is to the sprit. If we just follow it along, there's nothing else on it. The only other sections of interest are here, where there is another splice, because this needed to be longer than 2 meters. I'll pull that apart now and show you it. There we are, made in exactly the same way as the other one. You can see the rivets there underneath the heat shrink, and that just slides in and it works really well. And at the end of the sprit here, you can just see I made a protruding bolt. You can see the bolt head sticking out there, and that larger diameter that engages onto the hoisting point of the sail and lifts the sail up where it's required. I then just stuck another protective cap on the end there, made out of cutting board again. That's the sprit. Here is the leeboard, very simple to make, just made out of plywood. I rounded the corners. I didn't bother making a foil section, I just left it flat and it works fine. And this is really, really, really simple. This was my own kind of design. The plans have a completely different leeboard setup, but I just wanted something really simple. So all I did, I drilled a small hole in the side of our tender. Actually, I drilled 2, one on each side, so you can swap over from one side to the other if required, and the hole can just be plugged with a small wooden, what are they called? Somebody in the comments section tell me what they're called. The little wooden things that you get from IKEA when you're putting furniture together, the little wooden things that, you know what I'm talking about, don't you? So you just plug the hole with that, and then you only have one hole. And then this is threaded bar, stainless steel threaded bar, and I drilled a hole and tapped the hole and then screwed the threaded bar into this short section of the same tube that the sprit is made out of. That's a handle now. This was tightened so that it's completely jammed. I believe I put some thread lock on there as well. This is now a bolt that doesn't need a tool, so you can spin the whole handle. And I then made 2 gigantic washers out of cutting board. Cutting boards are so useful for about 1 million different things. Go and buy a load of cutting boards and put them on your boat, they're ace. So I made 2 huge washers out of cutting board. The leeboard goes on the outside of your boat. You put a large washer and your toolless bolt through on the outside. On the inside you put another large washer. So this is on the other side of your hull now. This is on the inside of your hull, of your tender. And then you just got a wing nut. And then you tighten that up. And because of the friction created by the 2 large washers, there we are. Basically, if I turn this side, the wing nut almost doesn't want to turn because of the friction within there. So you can get a lot of torque on this. You can really torque it up with the size of the handle there. You can really squeeze that. The cutting board is a little bit compressible, so that acts as a shock absorber, and this squeezes between the hull, and this worked brilliantly. This leeboard, it didn't move under sail. You tighten this up, it never moves. At the same time, if you were to hit a rock or some other obstruction underwater, then this would kick up and rotate around the bolt, and it wouldn't break. So very simple. Again, I found it to be very effective. So hopefully somebody else can find that useful too. This is the rudder, and I massively over-engineered this. I made this just after I'd made the boat. I'd just learned how to laminate wood, and I had a lot of bits of leftover wood, so I kind of, like I say, I massively over manufactured this. The design concept with this is that it stays down in the water, it's very stiff. This can kick up, so again, like the dagger board, if I were to sail into a rock, then this would kick up like that. That's also useful if you've got your tender on a pontoon or on a beach. You don't necessarily have to remove the rudder, you can just kick it up and then it stays away from the ground. So it does work. As I say, you know, you can see how I made this. I laminated all the wood together. I made you know, large washers out of plastic. You can see the different laminates of the wood there. I've since thought about this. You could make it about 1,000 times more simple, so I wouldn't necessarily use this exact design myself again if I was to build this again, but there you are, you can see how I made it. So I'll just push that back down. There we are, that's ready to sail now. You can see how I attach the tiller. You've just got a section of aluminium flat bar bolted through here on the top of the rudder, and then it's bolted with a single bolt through the tiller. And the tiller is made out of an axe handle, which I bought in a DIY store very cheaply, but it's quite a nice finished product. You know, you don't need to do anything to it other than drill a hole through it. So that was very convenient, and it's very strong. One thing that is quite interesting is the way that I attached the rudder to the tender. I saw that you can buy the correct fittings to do that, but they're very expensive again. I don't like to buy expensive things if I can help it. So I made my own system. It's a quick release rudder. You have to use your imagination here because it's raining outside. I can't show you the tender, but basically on the tender you've got some eye bolts like this, facing in the opposite direction. So they come from this side, and you've got the eye here. So as you bring the two parts together, the eyes all line up with each other, and then if you drop in this copper pipe, and at the end I just hammered it flat so that it becomes a wider section. I drilled that, stuck a little loop of Dyneema through it. Once you've got the eye bolts lined up together on the transom of the boat and on the rudder, you just drop in the copper pipe, and then the two are locked together. It pivots around the copper pipe, and as I say, it's quick release. If you want to get rid of the tiller and the rudder, you just pull that out and it comes off. So really simple, really quick. And the eye bolts are made out of stainless steel, which is harder than the copper. So if you were to use this over a number of years, the copper pipe would wear down, and in fact you can see some small marks on this where that started to happen, and then, you know, it might last 5-10 years, whatever, and then you can just make another one of these in about 10 minutes, and they're quite cheap. So I think it works well, and yeah, there you are. That's how I attached the rudder to the tender. Here are the sails that we've got. We've got an Optimist sail, standard off the shelf school sail, very cheap. It's a good sail. It's quite a lot of sail area, so you can use this in light winds. Once the winds pick up quite a bit, we've had some quite exciting times out sailing our tender, then you could do with less sail area. So I made a polytarp sail with roughly half the sail area of this. The quality of this is absolutely laughable. I made it in a very, very haphazard way. There we are. This is our storm sail. So I made telltales out of little pieces of line which I frayed. You know, the tack and the clue I made in a very gash way by cutting off sections and building up the layers, stitching it by hand with a little needle, and I also used quite a large diameter line. It's a small diameter line, but it's a very large diameter as a thread. I threaded that through, again, by hand. So yeah, you certainly don't look very posh when you're out sailing this, but if you're in heavy winds and you want to get back to your boat and you want to sail back, then this is handy to have. And it was extremely cheap to make. So that's how I made our sailing rig for our tender. We've had a lot of fun in ours, and I do recommend that you do this yourself. You know, if you're anchored in a bay with your main boat and you want to go exploring places, there's no better way of doing that than by sail in your tender. You know, you've got no problem with draft. You can get into all the little nooks and crannies that you can't get to with your boat, and it's a really peaceful and satisfying way to explore a new place. We're about to go ashore. We're going to go into this bay and see if there's anything to see up there. Well, that was a nice relaxing journey home, wasn't it?
Yeah. Beautiful.
If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, leave your comments below, they're always welcome, and we will see you in another video in the near future. Hopefully there will also be Rossella and Emma, so you won't have to look at my ugly mug the whole way through the video. Thank you very much to our patrons for supporting our work. You really help us to make videos like this, and we really appreciate your pledges, so thank you very much indeed. Okay, see you next time, guys. Ciao.